Hello, and welcome back to AJC Virtual Global Forum. Thank you for joining us. My name is Melanie Nelkin. I'm a member of American Jewish Committee's Executive Council. For those of you who are new to AJC, Global Forum is the premier global Jewish advocacy event of the year. I'm sure I speak for all of you when I say, I wish we could be together in person, but we're delighted to gather virtually to examine the critical issues facing the Jewish people and Israel. I've had the pleasure of being part of so many different areas of AJC's work. As past president of AJC Atlanta, I've seen firsthand how our activities at the local level have a direct impact on a global scale, reflecting our political and diplomatic advocacy, as well as our intergroup and interfaith work. On the international side, I've been closely involved with AJC's Transatlantic Institute in Brussels, our Africa Institute, and our Bernstein Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights. I can say without question, AJC's impact is truly felt both across the country and continents. Much of my experience with AJC has been reflected in our program these past 4 days. I can assure you that some of our most important segments await you in the next hour. As you'll see, and as you've seen throughout our program, AJC is committed to reimagining what's possible. We're using our global architecture and expertise to help create a better world. If you'd like to join us in our efforts, we'd love to have you. Please visit ajc.org. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know you'll enjoy the program.
AJC グローバルフォーラムにご出席の皆様、日本国内閣総理大臣の菅義偉です。本日、AJC 関係者、ユダヤ人コミュニティの皆さんの前でご挨拶させていただく機会をいただき光栄です。4月、私は各国の首脳に先駆けて、バイデン大統領と初となる対面での会談を実施し、インド、太平洋の地域の平和と繁栄への米国のコミットメントを確認するとともに、その一いたる日米同盟の結束を対外的に力強く示しました。強固な日米同盟は、両国の社会の間の絆により支えられており、日本と米国のユダヤ人コミュニティの友情は、この大切な一部です。特に日本と AJC との関係は、20世紀初頭の日露戦争の時に生まれた、当時の日銀副総裁の高橋是清と AJC 創設者の一人である銀行家、ジェイコブ・シフの友情まで遡ることができる歴史あるものです。昨年は第二次世界大戦中に在カウナス副領事を務めた杉原中根氏がいわゆる命のビザを発給し、多くのユダヤ避難民を救ってから80周年となる節目の年でした。杉原中根氏の勇気ある人道的行為は我々日本人にとって誇りであるとともに、今もなお日本とユダヤ人の歴史ある友情の象徴です。AJC は長きにわたり日本との関係を構築、強化してこられました。その貢献に対し、日本国を代表して心から感謝するとともに敬意を表します。引き続き皆さんと共にこの絆を大切にしていきます。このフォーラムの成功を記念するとともに、日本とAJC、日本とユダヤ人コミュニティの友情を一層促進する機会となることを期待をし、私からのご挨拶とさせていただきます。ありがとうございました。
Hi, my name is Toby Levy. I was born the same year Hitler came to power, 1933. I come from an Orthodox home. Life was fair. In my time, everything was going well till 1941, when the Germans occupied my town. That's when they let us know what the Jews had, what's in store for the Jews. I would say life ended at that time. My father was very lucky because he got work in a lumber yard where other people worked, not only slave laborers. He was counting on the people that knew him all his life to save him. He realized right away what the Germans where they're aiming at, that we have no chance of making it unless we have help from the outside. We went in hiding in 1942 to Stephanie in a barn. That's where we were for 2 years, from 1942 to 1944. We had mice, lice, rats, you name it, no food. Every day was a sheer miracle. It is thanks to my father. We went in hiding 9 people. Us 4, my mom's sister and 2 younger cousins I had, and her husband, my uncle, and my maternal grandmother. All 9 of us were liberated in 1944 by the Russians. We were liberated in 1944. We waited till the war ended in 1945, just like my father predicted. There are going to be other survivors. All the 2 years in hiding, he kept saying to us, someone has to survive because the world has to know what happened. Maybe it's us. It took quite a few months till we came to the American zone. I wound up in the displaced person camp. The first thing idea was to teach the children. We had teachers right away, children. So from 45 to 49, this was the best years of my life. I had freedom, teachers. We went hiking. I learned to talk. I learned to laugh. I learned to cry. I learned to be alive, a human being. It talked us into going someplace else. So my father decided to go to the United States. We came to New Orleans. 2 weeks on the trip. It was horrendous, but we came there. Well, let me tell you, down the Mississippi River was to me a life I never imagined. I was so excited. I went from one side to the other side. I was 16 and a half by the time I came to New Orleans. The lights, the people, the cars, I was at awe. And I said to my father, what the hell did you stay in this godforsaken country? Why didn't you come to the United States earlier? He says, no complaints, we're here now. Let's try and make it. And thank God we did. We had help, of course, from the Hayas and the Joint. Mostly the Joint were there to help us. This woman was our guide. She got a job for my father, put me into school. We stayed in New Orleans and was, what can I tell you, the best years. We worked hard. We tried the best. We made it. And the same thing was in New York. The American Jews were not ready to hear what happened to the Jews in Europe. That's a fact. It took many, many years till the survivors, when they went forward, they made their life, but we never forgot. We always lived with it, but we went forward. We got married. Well, let me tell you, America was great to us. But finally, we realized life is good. When Israel came around, the kids got older, we traveled to Israel. Israel to me is life. Israel to me, in my opinion, the Jews without Israel are not going to make it. The Jews need an Israel. Without Israel, we are no one. If anything goes wrong any place else, I do not need a visa anymore. I can get on the plane and go. I will be accepted. Israel, to me, I feel freedom. It gives me the security that I have a place to run. Anti-Semitism is brewing now, not just in Europe, in the United States too. but I'm so secure we have Israel. We build a gorgeous country that the whole world has to be proud, but somehow the whole world is jealous. You know what? I'm voting in the United States since I came in 1949. I think 1955 I became a citizen, I started voting. I always voted for a candidate that's good for Israel. I always say America will survive with any president, but Israel cannot. They need every president to be with Israel. That's my teaching, my children. And I am not only proud, but this is my life till I was 80. Thank you for having me. And I need all of you to remember me and be my witness. I am the proudest to be an American Jew.
I'm Manya Pashman, co-host of AJC's weekly podcast, People of the Pod, here to moderate another historic announcement from the AJC Global Forum stage. With us to discuss is Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, Senator Jacky Rosen of Nevada, and Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. Senators, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Thank you very, very much.
So, reinvigorating the Black-Jewish alliance that was at the bedrock of the civil rights movement. And it's key to combating racism, rising anti-Semitism, both here in America and around the world. And that's why today's announcement is so critical. The three of you have joined us here on the Global Forum stage to announce the first ever Senate caucus on Black-Jewish relations. Could you share with our audience, please, each of you, what you hope to accomplish through this caucus?
I would suggest the wisdom, Tim, of you and I yielding to Jacky first.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to tell you that I'm so proud to be here with Tim and Cory, because when I went and talked to them about this idea, there wasn't a hesitation for a second. And I'm just so excited to do this, the first time it's ever happened in the Senate. And I just know that we are going to have so many good conversations, positive things going forward, and we're going to show real leadership in this issue. And just very excited to announce this.
So, senators, why didn't you hesitate?
Cory, or you want me to go first?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a lifelong journey in many ways, understanding and appreciating the parallel tracks that the Jewish community and the Black community have been on. If you think about it from a biblical perspective, 4 centuries of slavery in Egypt, and you think about the 4 centuries the African Americans were enslaved, there are tracks that are parallel, and pain that creates promise and opportunity, the tragedies that became triumphs. It's a story that continues on. And for my life, for me, it seems it's just personal in that some of my first mentors, Larry Freudenberg, who helped me become a part of his insurance agency, and that gave me a piece of the pie and taught me not to work for someone, but work for yourself always. Or Jerry Zucker, whose family became billionaires. He was one of my first guys who sat down with me when I wanted to go in the restaurant business and said, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Thank God he did, by the way, because I went into the insurance business and did very well there. So my first chief of staff was an observant Jew. My consultant is still an observant Jew. So really, my relationship has spanned 40 plus years. And this is an opportunity for us to weigh in on critical issues that face our nation and do it together. And thank you, Jacky, for your wisdom and the friendship and the leadership that you're showing on behalf of not just the United States Senate, but on behalf of the nation, bringing all of us together.
Thank you.
And I'll just say, first of all, that I'll start where Tim ended there. Just God bless Jacky for being the principal provocateur for creating this historic first ever caucus. I'll be frank, it was very hard to have a Black Jewish caucus in the past because really weren't any Blacks serving in the Senate. I'm the fourth elected black senator in the history, but Tim was here first. He was appointed, then he won. And when Tim won, that became the first time in American history that two black elected senators were serving at the same time. And what I will say about Tim, he's sort of a modest person. He was very clear about his past, but what he really struck me as somebody when he got to the Senate is he became a champion of issues surrounding Israel. And when he and I saw a bit of issues going on in the foreign policy world, he and I made a determination that to show a black commitment to the state of Israel, he and I did something that had never been done before. The two black members of the Senate went out to Israel, took tours of the nation, met with the leadership and more. So I know Tim's heart, and we both are men of faith. I go to Bible study with Tim, and just to be in Israel with him and get to know him even more as a friend and see his commitment to the shared ideals of these two great Abrahamic faiths is something that makes me even think this is more special to be with him in this coalition. And then finally, many folks know that my journey to Judaism didn't start as a senator. I've been studying Torah now on and off for more than 20 years. The Jewish faith, which has been the center in many ways of some of the great black activists in American history. If you look at most of Martin Luther King's major speeches, including his last, I've been to the mountaintop, they all are coming from the Torah, from the Old Testament. If you go where King was slain at Lorraine Motel, it's words from the Torah that are written there. The words of Joseph's brothers, "Behold, here cometh the dreamers. Let us slay him and see what becomes of the dream." And so I've been deeply influenced by the Jewish faith. I've been very blessed by that journey, and also know, as Tim does, our civil rights history from Rabbi Yocham Prince from Newark, who spoke right before King on the March on Washington, to Abraham Joshua Heschel, to even perhaps the most profound testimony from Tim and my faith, as well as from the Jewish ideals of Hillel. If I'm not for myself, who am I? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? But Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, who died together in the civil rights movement, showing that kind of commitment and the kind of radical love that is at the core of both faiths.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Senator Booker. That was a wonderful summation of why this makes sense. This caucus makes so much sense now. Senator Rosen, I want to go back to you and ask, I mean, this caucus has a mission statement, right? And if so, could you share some of its key points?
Well, I will tell you that, and I'll just say one last thing is that, I'm the third Jewish woman to be in the United States Senate. So you think the first two elected Black men to the United States Senate, the third Jewish woman, and here we are making history. And, the reason that there's a mission statement is because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? So our mission statement is really, really important, because during the civil rights movement, like we all spoke about, Black and Jewish Americans came together to fight racism, anti-Semitism, hate, and bigotry. So what is this caucus going to do? We're going to show leadership by getting together with our communities, with you all here today, allies and partners around our country, our faith-based leaders and other community leaders, to talk about education, to have common conversations, to find out what we believe, the same beliefs we have, social action and social justice. My rabbi's father, blessed memory, Sidney Axelrod, marched with Martin Luther King in the 1960s. And his son, who's my rabbi, it brings a rich history to that, to my home congregation. And so we want to work to continue. This work is never done. It's going to be ongoing. This is just the beginning. We're going to keep doing it, and hopefully those will keep following us, because there's always more young people to come up that need to know what's going on, how to band together with allies and partners for social action and social justice.
So you all have spoken about the long and storied history. Senator Booker, you mentioned Rabbi Heschel. I had the opportunity to interview his daughter recently, and she talked about how her father really believed that the lives and futures of Black Americans and Jewish Americans were very closely intertwined. Can you speak to the degree of Black Jewish cooperation in Congress and also what each of you see in your states? What are the relationships you see in South Carolina, New Jersey, and Nevada?
Well, Tim, why don't you go first?
Sure. In South Carolina, one of the things I'm excited about is that we're one of the leading states on movements that stopped the BDS movement. Our state was the first to adopt legislation led by Alan Clements, but within that state that we have strong, healthy relationships within the African American and Jewish communities. There was something a while back called Operation Understanding. It was at least a regional program, if not nationwide, and it brought African Americans and Jewish folks together in the 11th and 12th grade. They spent 2 years getting to understand and appreciate each other's cultures, each other's faith, and they went to Charleston. They went to Atlanta, to Birmingham, Tuskegee, and DC as a part of this program. And it's those seeds that have been sown throughout South Carolina that makes us such a strong place to see positive, healthy, encouraging relationships. It's one of the reasons why, as a senator, I sponsored the Anti-Semitism Act that was to change the definition for anti-Semitism on college campuses, is because of the healthy relationship that I've watched grow over, as I said, over 40 years. And that program, Operation Understanding, is kind of the icing on the cake. It's the best way to distill what a healthy relationship looks like within South Carolina. As I said, it's a program that's been around for a long time and extends beyond the borders of South Carolina. But it's that willingness to see ourselves and our kids participate in a program of understanding and appreciating the parallel universes that exist and how much they cross over, how much cross-pollination has happened throughout history. That's probably the best example I can give on why it's so important and what South Carolina is doing about it.
Senator Rosen?
Well, I can tell you that Nevada is a diverse state. We have many communities that make up our one Nevada. And unfortunately, we've had our share of tragedies. But what I do know is this: when times are good, Nevadans come together to celebrate, because you see that, especially in the Las Vegas Strip, when people are having a fun time. And you've seen it when we've had a tragedy on that same Las Vegas Strip, when we came together as a community to overcome adversity. And this last summer, we did have a lot of protests over the police violence. And I was able to join with Black leaders in Nevada, our federal delegation, our state delegation, our governor, faith-based leaders, so important. I'm actually was a president of my synagogue in the past before I was here, and I can tell you that there's interfaith alliances. Nevada is a small state, and so we're able to know each other. So these alliances really moved us forward. And so there's broad coalitions, just ADL, AJC, all across the board. We come together, we march together, we sing together, because one thing that we know for sure, and I want to talk to Senator Scott, keeps bringing up 40 years. Well, 40, somebody wandered 40 years in the desert, then they found a home. So you're wandering of 40 years, we have found a coalition. So there you go. It took that, we'll put that in there. But we
I love
know
that, Jacky.
That's right. Think about that. He wandered 40 years, and here we are. We found a home. And I can tell you that Black Americans are targeted for their race. Jewish Americans most targeted for their religion. Yes. And we have to stop this. And when we stand shoulder to shoulder and say enough is enough, that's when the healing and positive change begins.
And Senator Booker, what do you see in New Jersey?
Well, first of all, I'm a little upset because, and I hate to put tension between a Black senator and a Jewish senator, but you notice how she dropped that she was president, and I, of course, failed to try to get that title. So I'm a little upset that there's one president at least represented in this call of a great shul, and I had the pleasure of giving tribute to her recently, and when she was honored by her own synagogue. So, and then she fails, and the second grievance, this is the airing of the grievance section. The second grievance is she didn't mention the most important Black Jewish bond in in the entire state of Nevada, at least from my perspective.
Your
And that is
mother.
that my mom lives in Nevada and is a good friend and a huge fan of her Jewish senator. So that relationship is perhaps very critical. So, but I aired my grievances. I got it off my chest. I hope you feel some good Jewish guilt there.
Duly noted. Duly noted.
But look, Jersey, my whole life story in New Jersey is about Black Jewish relations. My family was denied housing time and time again in New Jersey when my parents were trying to move from here in DC. I was just a baby. It was 1969. And this remarkable coalition of Blacks and whites, Christians and Jews in northern New Jersey set up a sting operation to buy the house that I would eventually grow up in. In fact, the white couples kept posing as my parents. The white couple that put a bid on the house that my parents were denied. On the day of the closing, my dad and the white couple didn't show up. My dad did, and a volunteer Jewish lawyer named Marty Friedman showed up. And Marty was punched in the face by the real estate agent. A Doberman Pinscher was signaled my dad. And that's what my parents raised me to understand, what leaders, and in this particular case, Jewish leaders, did for my family, the very entrance I had to my state. But it didn't stop there. You all know I was the mayor of Newark. The legendary Jewish diaspora in Newark is not just spanned throughout the globe, and great names like Philip Roth and others coming from Weequahic High School. But if you go to the Weequahic High School Alumni Association, which is predominantly Jewish, and see what they do, is they're back in Weequahic High School, which is predominantly Black, and they're serving and they're making contributions. When I was mayor of the city of Newark, tremendous Jewish engagement, philanthropy came from people who did not forget where they came from. Now as a senator, I have an entire state where I work closely with a number of Jewish organizations all across the Jewish sort of spectrum, from this great organization all the way to great Orthodox rabbis, Lubavitch rabbis, conservative Reform rabbis, who really are living the call of the Jewish faith to heal the world, to tikkun olam, who are engaged in Jewish issues but understand that their destiny is interwoven with the destiny of others. And so my whole life has been this experience over and over again, where this tie between our communities, as James Baldwin wrote about the arrest of one of his friends, if they come for you in the morning, they'll come for us at night. And this understanding that we are locked, and that hate, especially as we see rises in anti-Semitism, the hate, anti-Semitism, racism, they're all fruit of the same poisonous tree, and we all have an obligation to do something about it. And the last thing I'll say, which I'm really proud of, in many ways, Blacks and Jews have been a very strong conscience of this entire country, helping this nation to live up to its democratic ideals by being challenged by those who are often marginalized or excluded. We've tried, our communities have a history of working to make this country see itself, its truth, its beauty, its wonder. And I'm just excited to be in partnership with this coalition you see before you, from different political perspectives and different faiths and different races, that we can do our best to make America live up to its promise of a multicultural, inclusive democracy. And that song sung during the high holiday, Ki beiti beit tefillah l'chol amin, may my house be a house of prayer for many nations. That is a Jewish ideal, but it's also a very American ideal.
Mm-hmm. So we are at a point, you've all mentioned it, we're at a point in our nation's history when Black and Jewish communities both face hate, they both face bigotry, and many are trying to figure out how to unite around those issues that affect each other's survival. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. What can leaders in the Jewish community do to help raise up and address key concerns for the Black community? And likewise, what is the role of the Black community in combating anti-Semitism?
I'll start with the role of the Black community in confronting anti-Semitism. One of the things you have to do is be willing to speak out. I mean, as Jacky was talking about earlier, the African-American community is the largest group of people violated by hatred from a racial perspective, and our Jewish brothers and sisters from religion. The Black community should be as outspoken against hate in the Jewish community as anybody else, having felt the sting and the dehumanization of that hatred, we should speak. And one of the things that I've tried to do, and I see happening as well, is when we see hatred and attacks on our Jewish brothers and sisters, whether that's in New York recently, we should speak out. And so I've been tweeting out about that hatred. When we see it in the Middle East against Israel, we should speak out and be loud and clear about our stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters across the globe. And that is one of the most important things that we can do. I partnered with a guy named Norm Brownstein and Mark Rowan on the Anti-Semitism Act. I looked for ways to work with my state legislator back at home on the BDS movement. We've seen that if you just take that stand, others will follow. And this is a really important place for us to take a stand. It is not enough to know it's wrong. If you know it's wrong, you must stand up and be counted. In Proverbs 31, it says, stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. And as national leaders, we bear the responsibility, the burden, and the privilege of standing in the gap for so many Americans who feel concerned about their personal and physical safety. We can do something about that with our voices and with the legislation that we pass. We should do both, and I will continue to do so.
I guess I would add is that some of the things that that everyone's talked about are faith-based communities, are the targeting of hatred, how we've had to take care of each other, stand up for each other. When we know something is wrong, it is our obligation to speak up and stand up and speak out. And that by doing so, we're showing real leadership, because that's what real leaders do. It isn't always what's popular. We can't legislate everything. But what we can do is set an example through our actions, not just our words, but through our actions. That's what this does. We have, however, done one thing with our actions to help places like the Mother Emanuel Church or the Tree of Life Synagogue, who are vandalized, so many cemeteries, churches, and synagogues, of course, across the country. We have hardened and funded through Homeland Security, that nonprofit security grant. So there are sometimes things we can legislate. That gives money for nonprofits, religious institutions, communities of faith, to be sure that they have the wherewithal to protect themselves. Why do we do it? Because we know that if you save one life, it's as good as saving every life. And we know if you change a life, it's the same thing. So what we have to do is band together, talk to each other, set an example for others to follow, bring them along. And that's how this continues and grows and bears positive fruit, bears great fruit, not poison fruit of hate, but bears true sweet fruit.
And Jacky, one of the things that we could do before the great Cory Booker talks to us, I think one of the things we could do is to use the African American National Museum and the Holocaust Museum as a way to bring folks together from our communities. This would be one of the projects that we could champion. I serve on the council at the Holocaust Museum, and I will tell you that I have learned so much in so little time in this last 18 months since I've been on the council. And I will say that this is a golden opportunity for young kids across the country to have an Operation Understanding, to bring African American and Jewish kids, high school and college students through the two museums. It would be a wonderful experience, and the three of us or the four of us could have an opportunity to perhaps have them over at the CBC, since we're opening back up, and have a conversation and a dialogue about what we have in common. I think what's become popular in America today is to look for the fissures that separate and the stress fractures below the surface, as opposed to the common history that literally spans time. To the extent that we understand and appreciate that golden opportunity, we'll probably see people leaning in and standing in a defensive posture for folks who've been in similar situations. That would be a powerful message spoken to all of this nation.
Well, I'm on the Holocaust Council with you, and I'm co-chair and co-founder of the first ever bipartisan task force that you're part of to combat anti-Semitism. James Langford and I have been talking about having a field trip to the Holocaust Museum. I think we should partner them together. It is a terrific a terrific idea, because every human being, I believe, is at its best when they have something to build and work towards. Not
Yes.
something to tear down, but something to look towards. And looking towards, we're going to look over to Senator Booker, who I know always has the inspirational message that something we work towards. I think it is when we're at our very best and we have a goal and we're reaching out with someone's hand to do something good. It's when we're all at our best.
Yes, ma'am.
And Senator Booker, we will give you the last word on this.
Well, I'm going to say a couple things. One is, I think both of the senators have said rightfully that we have a job to do, all of us. So whether it's combating BDS, I'm proud of the work that I've done with my colleagues on that, to getting resources to help synagogues have money for protection. King said it very clearly: I can't legislate you to love me, but I can pass legislation to stop you from lynching me. I can't legislate to change someone's heart, but I can legislate to restrain the heartless. And so we actually have a job to do, and the three of us, I think, along with others, always keeping these issues in focus. That's our job. But all of us are leaders. And I think both of my colleagues said it right. If you listen to the two speeches of Rabbi Prince, who spoke before King, and then King, there is this call to what Tim talked about, is not being silent. Now, let me make this, because this is not all cheers and a real friendship. And Tim and I, who are working now on police reform legislation, real friendship is not telling people what they want to hear, sometimes being honest and candid with them. And so I'll just say this, and I don't know if Tim, I'll get a hallelujah or amen, but you and I have been in many Black churches where some non-Black politician comes in and says a lot of things about racism and criminal justice reform. And I often just sit there and say, what are they saying in front of the white churches? Are they bringing up these same issues? It is not enough for me to stand up in front of a synagogue and talk about anti-Semitism. What needs to happen, and this is where I see Tim doing this consistently, and Jacky, as a friend I know, does this consistently in her state. We need people to not speak where it's comfortable and convenient, but we need folks who are speaking up when it's not, when it actually is a risk. And this is where we are in America right now, I think, because we need more people that are willing to go against the grain. It's very easy right now. There's manufactured outrage all across the political spectrum. There is people that want to demonize others, otherize others. I think the mission that and this is where I feel a spiritual bond with Jacky and Tim, is that our mission is to reduce the otherness and expand the usness, is to try to deepen those coalitions. I'm very conscious of the fact there has never been a period where Blacks and Jews were not working together in America. People want to talk about the heyday. There's always been, they don't get the attention. What gets the attention is the rifts and the conflicts and that. And so what I hope we can use our platform as people that have maybe a modicum more notoriety is not just for the legislative stuff, but the stuff my two colleagues were just talking about how do we do the things to help folk in our communities become more aware, deepen empathy, expand love, and love necessitates knowledge. So I'm just really grateful for my friends, and I know we have a lot of challenges, but as they say, Bezrat Hashem, we will be successful in expanding the light and the love and the connection in both of our communities. And as often has been the case with Blacks and Jews who are willing to open their hearts to be champions of these ideals, it really helps to ignite that in even beyond our own communities.
Mm-hmm. Well put. Senator Rosen, Senator Booker, Senator Scott, thank you for assembling this historic Senate caucus on Black-Jewish relations, and thank you for sharing the news of it on the virtual Global Forum stage. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, and I proudly represent Michigan's 14th Congressional District. As one of the founding members of the House Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, I'm excited by my Senate colleagues who have moved forward to launch such a caucus in the Senate, the Senate Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. These two caucuses, comprised of Republicans and Democrats, Black members, Jewish members, and allies, are a reflection and testament to the caucus ideas. Racism and anti-Semitism are not just Black issues or Jewish issues or Democratic or Republican issues. They are forms of deep-seated hate that can only be overcome together. As members of Congress, it's our duty to stand up in the face of anti-Semitism and racism, to condemn it and work within our community and in the halls of Congress to ensure that no one is attacked because of their religion or race. I look forward to working closely with Senator Jacky, Rosen, Cory Booker, and Tim Scott as they launch the Senate Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations and stand committed to supporting our Black and Jewish communities in their time of need and to calling out hate whenever and wherever we see it.
This is Congressman Lee Zeldin, and I'm so proud to be a co-chair of the Black-Jewish Caucus in the House, and I'm thrilled that senators of both parties are stepping up to form a Black-Jewish Caucus in the Senate. Let's work together and build the bridge, the relationship, and overcoming the challenges needed for the Black community and the Jewish community to work together today and for years, decades, and generations into the future. Thank you to my Senate colleagues for your leadership. Thank you for stepping up.
2 years ago, Congresswoman Lawrence, Congressman Hurd, Congressman Zeldin, and the late Congressman John Lewis and I established the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. We all shared a commitment and took pride in the history of our communities fighting hatred, injustice, and inequality together. Today, this work is more important than ever before. So I'm honored to welcome my Senate colleagues who are forming a Senate Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. I look forward to working alongside Senator Rosen, Senator Booker, and Senator Scott in a bicameral effort. In the face of increased hate crimes, it is crucial that we revitalize the historic bond between the Black and Jewish communities and unequivocally denounce and condemn the alarming rise in rampant hate, violence, and harassment. We also must take real action to combat systemic oppression. Together, through hard work and honest conversations, we can work towards the goal that generations to come can live in an America without anti-Semitism, racism, intolerance, or hatred.
My name is Alissa Bernstein, and I'm a recent graduate of Occidental College in Los Angeles, California. Occidental is a small liberal arts school with a modest Jewish community, so I didn't anticipate that anti-Semitism would become a defining characteristic of my college experience. However, after a series of anti-Semitic incidents on campus, I quickly realized how little my classmates knew about the Jewish community. It was apparent to me that my classmates needed to learn more about anti-Semitism. So I decided to do something about it. I became president of Occidental College Hillel, and we began lobbying our administration to implement a counter-anti-Semitism training as part of freshman orientation. After getting pushback from campus officials, I knew I needed help. Our Hillel vice president, who'd been interning at AJC, gave me the answer. AJC was here to help. Over the past year, I've worked closely with AJC to advocate for the needs of Jewish students on campus. To date, the university has sponsored 2 sessions on anti-Semitism in America featuring AJC experts. And starting this fall, all incoming students at Occidental will receive training on how to understand and spot anti-Semitism. They'll learn how unchecked anti-Semitism creates a hostile atmosphere for Jewish students, not to mention for the campus as a whole. Although I just graduated, I'm gratified and relieved to know that future Occidental College students will learn about anti-Semitism. I'm grateful to AJC and proud of our role as students. Together, we were able to reimagine what's possible for young Jews on campus.
For many years, the AJC has played a central role in advocating for the Jewish people, combating anti-Semitism, BDS, and supporting Israel's fight against terror.
Je souhaite tout d'abord remercier chaleureusement l'American Jewish Committee pour son invitation et vous dire toute l'importance que j'accorde à votre travail pour lutter contre l'antisémitisme et la haine, encourager le dialogue et promouvoir les valeurs démocratiques.
AJC は長きにわたり日本との関係を構築・強化してこられました。
I am proud that the Republic of Kosovo decided to adopt the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism.
We will also continue to urge other countries to normalize their relations with Israel, and we will look for opportunities to expand cooperation among countries in the region.
I am incredibly proud of my history with the American Jewish Committee. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you do, and I look forward to our partnership.
Your presence in the UAE is part of our journey, but is part of changing mindsets. So let's keep on working closely, understanding each other better, and trying to look forward rather than looking backwards.
We are sending the message from a small nation saying that peace is the way forward.
The AJC has been at the forefront of re-establishing the Jewish community's relationship with Germany. Only 3 years after the end of the war, the AJC was the first global Jewish organization to engage.
I am pleased to announce today from this AJC stage that I have issued an executive order to establish the position of Commissioner of the OES for monitoring and combating anti-Semitism.
That the choice is between war or the JCPOA is simply not true. There is an alternative, which is unprecedented economic pressure on them, as well as clandestine operations designed to impede the program.
Either we are able to limit the nuclear program, or if we don't, we will go to this alternative, bombing Iran or Iran.
Our history is not just this continued cycle of persecution, it's this continued cycle of resilience.
I have seen the biggest challenge to fighting both anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is just apathy.
So we can get on to figuring out how we can defend what has been, for Jews, the best diaspora experience in all of Jewish history. I think right now we're feeling like we're being sort of like tugged back into the mean of Jewish history. And the only way that we can resist that is by standing up loudly now, because it will not get easier.
The only real security that a Jew has in the world today is the state of Israel. The only one.
We used to think that, well, the U.S. couldn't possibly change because of our long traditions of tolerance and liberalism. We're seeing that change now.
For those of you who somehow think that by being less Jewish, by being more anti-Israel, you will be able to feel a little bit more morally righteous, or you somehow have the belief that, it will save you. The reality is, I think that you are only caving in. The reality is that you are only, in the name of some pseudo ideology, throwing fellow Jews under the bus.
In many ways, blacks and Jews have been a very strong conscience of this entire country, helping this nation to live up to its democratic ideals.
We've seen that if you just take that stand, others will follow. And this is a really important place for us to take a stand. It is not enough to know it's wrong. If you know it's wrong, you must stand up and be counted.
It is our obligation to speak up and stand up and speak out, and that by doing so, we're showing real leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the closing session of AJC Virtual Global Forum 2021. My name is Belle Yoeli, and I'm AJC's Chief Communications and Innovation Officer. It's my privilege to be in conversation today with a lifelong Jewish activist, my boss and mentor, AJC CEO David Harris. David, as always, it's great to be with you.
And with you, Belle.
Over the past 4 days of AJC Virtual Global Forum, thousands of people have tuned in from across the United States and more than 40 countries. We've heard from world leaders, policymakers, civic and student leaders, and we've debated and discussed some of the most pressing issues facing the Jewish people and the world. Our theme has been reimagining what's possible, and after the past few days, I'm sure you can all understand why. Our program has reaffirmed that while we face many challenges, we do not have to accept the status quo. Together, it is possible to envision and create a better world. And on that note, David, there's a lot I want to ask you, so let's jump right in. As you look back on the past 4 days, David, we of course can't discuss everything, but what were some of the highlights for you? What are the important takeaways? What do you want the audience to remember? Perhaps beginning with the lineup of the speakers.
Well, perhaps, Belle, beginning with the staff, because what our audience saw over the last 4 days was the outcome of months and months of effort on the part of many staff colleagues who put a lot of love and a lot of professionalism into this, and I'd like to give a public shout out to my staff colleagues. I think this year's Global Forum has tried to capture what in German is called the Zeitgeist, the spirit of our times, and I think we succeeded in doing it. So the first takeaway is I think we captured the moment. We capture what's on the minds of so many people, and I think that helps explain why so many thousands of people across America and around the world tuned in to watch. Secondly, I'm very proud of the overarching theme, reimagine what's possible. As you said in your opening comment, this is not a time to reaffirm the status quo. This is a time rather to imagine what is possible. And I think that we displayed in the course of 4 days the fact that we can be authors of history. We can change things for the better. And we saw a lot of examples of that, particularly in a couple of areas. One, in reimagining the Middle East. Yes, to be sure, there are lots of serious challenges in the Middle East. Some were on display as recently as a few weeks ago when Hamas launched another war against Israel. But at the same time, we hosted the foreign ministers of the UAE and Bahrain, the ambassadors of Morocco and Sudan. We had a high-level Muslim-Jewish discussion between religious leaders. We had another important conversation between young leaders from Morocco and Israel. There's an awful lot going on, and it's very encouraging. I think we also made some very important announcements, and I hope we'll get to that in the course of the conversation, because those announcements are going to outlive the Global Forum. They're telling the world that we're thinking as creatively as we possibly can about next steps. I think people will also remember some of the very special moments, like the scintillating conversation among Bret Stephens, Barry Weiss, and Simone Rodin on the state of anti-Semitism. And there's so much more. You know, I'm almost reluctant to go down this slope because I know that I won't include everything. But I think we captured the domestic and international themes. I think we brought to our audience some of the highest level and most thoughtful speakers and leaders of our time. And I think that we were willing to both confront the challenges and problems, but also highlight the opportunities and progress that have been made. So that, in sum, for me, is what this Global Forum has been. And now the work begins again, post-Global Forum.
Thank you, David. And we, of course, will talk about the work after Global Forum. But I want to follow up on one thing that you just said. You highlighted several of the speakers, and especially speakers from the Middle East and the Arab world. Can you put that into context for us in terms of AJC's priorities? I know you talk a lot about having certain priorities in the 21st century, and I think it's important for our viewers to understand that.
So to step back for a moment, for those who are newer to AJC, AJC is what we'd like to call an audaciously ambitious organization. We're not just thinking about the next tweet or the next press release. We're thinking about big ideas, audaciously, and how we can try and help author history. And in the 20th century, the first century of AJC's existence, there were really three ways in which we highlighted those big ideas for me. One is embarking on an effort to expand the promise of America for more and more of its citizens, including but not limited to Jews, at a time in the early 20th century when that opportunity was really quite limited and stratified. The second area was in Christian-Jewish relations, and especially in Catholic-Jewish relations, to see whether we could write a new chapter, a brighter chapter, in relations between Christians and Jews after, 1900 years of serious, very serious challenges. And the third challenge arose as a result of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, and that was, after the war, what to do about Germany. Germany remained a powerful country in the center of Europe. It would have a future. AJC took on all three of these issues: the promise of America, the challenge of helping galvanize a revolution in Christian-Jewish relations, and the path of charting a new relationship with post-war Germany. Now we're in the 21st century, and I would say that once again AJC has three overarching challenges, and all of them were reflected in this year's Global Forum. The first challenge is, again, the promise of America. As we've been reminded in recent months and years, much as we've made enormous progress in this country, we're not quite there yet. There's much that remains to be done. And that's why it was so important in our Global Forum that we focused on the search for bipartisanship, the announcement of the U.S. Senate Black Jewish Caucus, the emphasis on the Muslim-Jewish Advisory Council. The second area where we're focusing is on trying to contribute to peace between Israel and the Arab world. Again, much has been done, and I'm proud of AJC's role over the last 30 years, but much remains to be done. But I think we have momentum now, and prospects look quite good. And the third is, having helped achieve a revolution in Christian-Jewish relations last century, can we spark a similar revolution in Muslim-Jewish relations in the 21st century? Those are our three primary goals, and all three were reflected in this year's Global Forum.
Thank you, David, for that important context. I want to follow up with one more thing specifically about the program details, because you were modest about it. The reality is, for those of us who I think are used to AJC, we might have gotten accustomed to having the President of France, the President of the European Commission, and senior officials from the Arab world perhaps at our Global Forum. But the fact of the matter is, for those of us on staff who work on this conference and who go back and do research on our past conferences in preparation for Global Forum, you see this year after year. Going back to the 1990s, world leaders join AJC Global Forum, senior U.S. officials join AJC Global Forum. I'd like our viewers to understand, how is this possible? Why is it that these world leaders come to speak to us? And why is this significant?
Well, I hope its significance speaks for itself, because what it really says is those who are part of the AJC community have a platform, and that platform allows all of us to engage with the world's decision makers. That doesn't mean it's an endorsement of each and every leader, but it is to say that if we're serious about fighting anti-Semitism, defending democratic values, advancing understanding of Israel, contributing to peace in the region, we have to be talking to the people who count, the people who are going to make the decisions that affect our very future. And I think AJC, I may argue, more than any other Jewish organization on the planet that I know, and more than most NGOs generally, has consistently been able to reach those top leaders. And not just one or two, but look at the program of 2021, as you mentioned, Belle, the President of France, the President of the European Union Commission, the President of Israel, the President of Kosovo, foreign ministers, ambassadors, U.S. senators, U.S. members of Congress, members of the Biden administration. And then you can say, well, maybe that's a fluke. But go back to 2020. We had the Chancellor of Germany, the Foreign Minister and Defense Minister of Germany. We had the Prime Minister of Greece, the Prime Minister of Albania. We had the Defense Minister of Israel. We had the Secretary of State of the United States. And we had the future Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo and Tony Blinken. And I can go on and on. And no, these are not sort of whimsical letters that we write to world leaders and say, would you consider speaking to the AJC Global Forum? And no, we don't go to speakers bureaus and say, how do we get so-and-so? Each and every one of the relationships on display in the Global Forum this year and in previous years is the product of months and years and often decades of investment, both in the personal relationship and in the relationship with the country or the institution. So these are not flukes. This is very much the AJC business plan. Identify American and world leaders, seek to engage them, establish trust, establish credibility, and then build on that. So in seeing, for example, the French president, one has to understand AJC has been investing in our relationship with France since after the Second World War, when we opened an office in Paris. And I can go on and on and on, but each of them reflects the AJC unique style of diplomacy. Build relationships for the long haul. And that's what people, I hope, have seen during this and previous global forums.
Thank you, David. And, in thinking about the speakers who come to talk to us, I know you're always very focused on not just the content and putting on a show, but really the output, the outcome over the output of Global Forum itself. And you mentioned some of those outcomes And I'd like to give you a chance to highlight any others, but also you referenced special announcements, and there were many throughout the conference. And if I know you, maybe you have another one or two up your sleeve. So I'm curious about that as well.
Well, I'll try and remember the outcomes, because there were many significant ones, but among them was, first of all, the announcement by AJC that we are now opening an office in the UAE. This is the AJC's 13th office overseas, our first in the Arab world, and I believe that that's a historic moment. We also introduced the audience to the first director, the founding director, if you will, of that office in the UAE. And he himself has a very distinguished diplomatic pedigree, having served as the U.S. ambassador to neighboring Oman for years, and having previously served in the region in a variety of Arab countries, not to mention in Turkey and in Israel. So we're absolutely thrilled about that. Secondly, we announced that AJC, beginning this week, is launching an AJC Farsi or AJC Persian communications effort on Instagram, on Twitter, through videos on YouTube, to reach a Farsi or Persian-speaking audience, both in Iran and around the world. And it follows on the extraordinary success of our AJC Arabic initiatives, which have been seen by literally tens of millions of people, whether on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. We're determined to engage in a direct conversation. We don't want third parties to get in the way, third parties being others who don't have the shared interest in expanding communications and expanding understanding, in direct contact between us and Arabic-speaking people, us and Farsi-speaking people. We extend our hand in friendship and in peace. So again, very exciting. We also talked about expanding AJC's Project Interchange, which for the last 30 years or more has brought world leaders to Israel to see Israel for themselves, and not through the prism, again, of third parties like the media. We've brought over 6,000 world leaders to Israel. Now we're expanding it to say we want to bring people from the Arab world to Israel, and we want to bring people that we're taking to Israel onward to one or more of the Arab countries that have normalized relations with Israel, because we want to be a net contributor to deepening and expanding the peace. We also announced that we are taking a classic book, The Children of Abraham, a primer about Jews and Judaism for the Muslim world, a book that was first written for AJC some 20 years ago by Dr. Reuven Firestone. We're updating it, and we're going to make it available in up to 6 different languages that are widely spoken throughout the Muslim world. Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, Turkish, Bengali, and Indonesian language, so that we will literally make available to hundreds of millions of people, if not more than 1 billion people, knowledge about Jews and Judaism which they otherwise could not get. Amidst all of the propaganda and all of the hype and all of the tropes that are too often out there, we want again to have a direct conversation. I'm also thrilled by the announcement of Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the influential Organization of American States, that following the European model and after extensive conversations with AJC, he announced that they will be appointing a commissioner to monitor and combat anti-Semitism among the 35 nations of Latin America under the umbrella of the OAS. And this is another remarkable development in the fight against anti-Semitism. We need partners, and now we will have the partnership of the Organization of American States in fighting anti-Semitism. And he said so much more. Here in the United States, we made another, what I believe to be, historic announcement. In 2019, from the AJC stage, the House Black Jewish Caucus was announced. Now, 2 years later, on this virtual stage, it was announced that the U.S. Senate will follow the House example, And Senators Rosen, Booker, and Scott collectively announced the creation of the Senate Black Jewish Caucus, something that's very much needed, and we were very proud to be associated with it. So I can keep going, Belle, but these were some of the great highlights. And yes, there are some more to come. One thing I'd like to announce at this moment is that in 2022, next year, we're going to be leaving the virtual format, we hope, if everything cooperates, and returning to Washington, D.C., which has been the normal venue for the AJC Global Forum. So we invite our entire audience to consider joining us in person in Washington in 2022. And a year later in 2023, coinciding with Israel's 75th anniversary of its rebirth, we are taking the AJC Global Forum back to Israel, as we did in 2018. We're very excited, and we think it's especially important, Belle, to announce it now, in the wake of the Hamas-launched war against Israel, in order to once again underscore and reaffirm AJC's enduring commitment to Israel, our total shoulder-to-shoulder solidarity, and that's why we're expecting another large audience in Israel to be there for the Global Forum, to bring their families, to see and experience Israel for themselves. And finally, since I have two sleeves, and you mentioned both sleeves, I'm also very pleased to announce another important AJC breakthrough. One of the themes of this year's Global Forum and past Global Forums has been the challenges facing young Jews, young friends of Israel, on campuses. We had a really powerful program with students from the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania, for example, speaking about their challenges on campus as proud Jews and as committed friends of Israel. In 2018, at the Jerusalem Global Forum, one of our great lay leaders, Gail Binderman, stood on stage with her son and her daughter and announced in the name of her late father's foundation, the Norman E. Alexander Family G Foundation, a $5 million gift at the time for our young leadership programs, including bringing young leaders to our global forums and helping our high school program, Leaders for Tomorrow, to strengthen. Now, on behalf of the foundation, of which Gail is the president, she has made another substantial gift on top of that original $5 million commitment, the result of which is that we will be naming our Young Leadership Department, which includes our high school, our college, and our post-college programs, in honor and memory of her father, and calling it the Norman E. Alexander Family G Foundation Young Leadership Department, or for short, the Alexander Young Leadership Department. For everyone who's concerned about the Jewish future, Gail has set a remarkable example for stepping up, stepping forward, and saying, Hineni, here I am, in memory of her father, and recognizing that this is the front line of Jewish advocacy. So thank you, Gail, for again setting an example. We're thrilled to launch this department in memory of your father's name, and we expect great things to come of it.
Well, David, I'm overwhelmed by both of those announcements, and obviously very excited to go back to Israel for our global forum, and about this really important investment in young leadership. And I think both of those pieces speak to, the darker side in terms of what we're discussing in this conversation, which is the challenges. So I don't want to take us from positive to negative, but I think we need to talk about them in this moment. And of course, our viewers need to hear from you. Global Forum is ending. And as you said, there's a lot of work to do. And I know I and many in the Jewish community are concerned and looking for guidance with the backdrop of the trauma of all the elements surrounding the conflict in Israel, both the violence initiated by Hamas itself and the response on social media and in the media that seems worse than ever before. And then we have the spike in anti-Semitism piece. And AJC is on the front lines on all of these issues, but I think everyone is kind of wondering, what do we do with this ground shift? Where do we go from here? What are your thoughts, David?
Well, let me frame it firstly, Belle, in just a brief anecdote, which some of the viewers may have heard before, but which I think is really apt for this part of the conversation, because it really speaks to AJC's sort of purpose in life, our mission, and the way we view the world. The legendary detective Sherlock Holmes was called to a case in the north of England, and together with his trusted aide, Watson, they went off in their horse and buggy. But the trip required an overnight stay, so they stopped in an open field and they pitched a tent, and they unfurled their sleeping bags and they slept side by side in the tent. In the middle of the night, Holmes suddenly woke up. He looked around and he elbowed Watson and he said, "Watson, my good man, what do you see?" And Watson took a moment to open his eyes and rub the sleep out, and then he said, "Holmes, I see the transcendence of time, the majesty of the universe, the extraordinary possibilities of life itself." And Holmes said to him, "Watson, cut the poetry. Someone has stolen our tent." And I think if we want to capture the mission of AJC, especially at a moment in time like this, we have to keep one eye, Belle, focused laser-like on the possibilities, the majesty of the universe, the big ideas, the transformative ideas, the kind of ideas we've talked about earlier in this conversation. And yet, on the other hand, with that second eye, we've got to be very mindful of the fact that someone is trying to steal our tent. And that tent represents our security, our stability, the warmth of our home. So my first answer is we need to be bifocal. We can never give up believing in the possibilities. We can never go into a defensive crouch, simply fending off our enemies, though we have enemies and we have to address it. On the other hand, we can't become so consumed with the challenges of the moment as to abandon that larger agenda which says we can transform Muslim-Jewish relations. We can contribute to peace between Israel and its neighbors. We can strengthen America's commitment to its promise for all. So we're on a dual track. That's number one. But more specifically, what happened in Israel should be a reminder of the challenges that we face in trying to explain and interpret Israel to many who either have never been there, can't imagine what life is really like because they've simply been poisoned by some of the ugliness of social media, or the celebrities or others who are depicting Israel in a demonic way, completely devoid of reality for anyone who's even spent 5 minutes in the country of Israel. We have our work cut out for us. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. For one thing, there were 30 countries that stood by Israel in the last war and did so with extraordinary moral clarity and moral courage. And I urge people who have not yet seen the film that we showed in the opening session to do so. And I've seen that it's become extremely popular on social media, by the way. Maybe not quite as popular as the celebrity posts, but people are watching it and people are taking note of who those 30 countries are. But we've got lots of other countries, we've got lots of politicians, we've got some journalists, we've got some celebrities who don't know the truth. Maybe Project Interchange can get some of them to Israel. Maybe we can reach some of them, as I did recently in an exchange with Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times columnist. But Israel is a great cause. I'm proud to defend Israel, as I have all my life. And I believe that AJC has the credibility, it has the chops, the policy chops to do so in an effective way. And then we have the problem of surging anti-Semitism, and I would commend to those who may not have seen it, that extraordinarily powerful session with Barry Weiss, Brett Stevens, and AJC's own Simone Rodin, because they tackled this issue very directly. They diagnosed it clearly. They pointed fingers where fingers were needed, and they charted some paths forward. And I agree with them. I agree with them, number one, we must be swivel-headed when it comes to anti-Semitism. AJC has been saying this for the last 20 years, often alone, while some other Jewish organizations refused to recognize the need for swivel-headedness and instead focused on only one source of anti-Semitism. But we have to come to grips with the fact, and the last month or 6 weeks has shown that the anti-Semitism comes not only from the far right, the radical right. We know that. It's recognizable. It's familiar. They don't hide it. We also have to deal with the far left, which tends to mask it. And we have to deal with this very peculiar alliance that we first saw in Europe, and now we see here between the jihadist elements and the far left. And of course, what makes it odd? Well, the fact that if the far left ever lived under jihadist rule, they would be around for probably 5 minutes, if that, before they'd be crushed. And yet they find common cause in their obsessive hatred for Israel, for Zionism, for Jews who are seen as extensions of Israel, for synagogues that are seen also as surrogates for Israel. So we've got to call it out, number one. Number two, we have to insist that our political leadership across the board, I think Simone Rodin used the term the political class, that our political leadership give no space to its condemnation of any form of anti-Semitism, and not just as a tweet or as a press release, but as a policy. Because without the support of political leadership in this country, as we also learned from our European experience, it's going to be very tough going. We need our leaders to take this seriously and send a clear message: zero tolerance. Number three, we need to expect the same of our institutions, our high schools, our colleges, our universities, NGOs, and others. Anti-Semitism should not be an afterthought. Anti-Semitism should not be rationalized or legitimized or justified, much less denied. Anti-Semitism should not always be lumped together with every other ism and phobia, as if there is not a specificity to anti-Semitism, as if people never learned anything from the history of the Jews and the history of the world. And number four, we have to prepare our children and our grandchildren for the fact that, one, they should be proud Jews. Two, they should be proud supporters of the state of Israel. And three, they should be prepared to stand up for what they believe in, not back down, not cower, not be intimidated, because they may be facing some difficult situations, whether in a high school classroom, in a college dorm, in a university quad, wherever it may be. And AJC, with the help of Gail Binderman and the Norman Alexander Family Foundation, has been really focused on helping to prepare young people through our LIFT program. And I hope those who may not be familiar with Leaders for Tomorrow will learn more about it, because it's a way of preparing our children to be effective Jewish ambassadors and advocates.
Thank you, David. I know we do have to wrap up, and it's hard to believe that the Global Forum is coming to a close. I think you've really made the case quite clear here, but I want to give you the opportunity to just sum it up and in expressing the urgency of this moment and really what we're facing, in addition to continuing to dream big and reimagine what's possible. Why AJC? It's clear to me, as a young Jew, committed professional Jew, I've dedicated my career to working in AJC. But to everyone watching, why get involved? Why support AJC specifically in this time, in this moment?
Well, first of all, let me be very personal, because something happened to me this week that deeply touched me. My granddaughter was one of 11 graduates, if you will, of nursery school. And I was watching the ceremony at the Chabad school. And I saw these 11 beautiful, innocent, eager, enthusiastic children. Jews who learned to celebrate Shabbat, Jews who learned to bake challah, Jews who learned to say the prayers, 4- and 5-year-old children. And I looked at them, and in a way, I have to say, I was madly in love, but I also wanted to cry, because I know what may await them. It's what you raised a few moments ago, Belle. It's what Jews in New York and Los Angeles experienced. It's what Jews in Toronto and London just experienced. I think that we, who are watching this program, who are involved with Jewish life, who are involved in AJC, we have an obligation to those 4- and 5-year-old children and to Jewish children across the country and around the world to bequeath to them the safety and security of being a Jew, the pride and knowledge of being a Jew. We should never, ever resort to becoming a Marano Jew. We should never think twice about whether we put a mezuzah on our door, or a kippah on our head, or the word Jewish on the facade of our institutions. And yet we may be moving in that direction. So we have to ask ourselves, each of us, all of us, what is our responsibility? We know that there are people who want to destroy the one and only Jewish majority nation on earth, and they couldn't care less who's the prime minister. Whether the prime minister comes from the center, the left, or the right, it doesn't matter. Israel is what matters to them, and they want it destroyed. And we know that when people went to a restaurant and said, "Who is a Jew?" they were not asking who is a Reformed Jew, and who is an agnostic Jew, and who's a cultural Jew, and who's an Orthodox Jew. They were looking for Jews. We know this. We have a responsibility, I believe. We have an opportunity to help shape the future of the Jewish people. Together with Israel, we comprise 90% of world Jewry. And so the question becomes, Belle, how do we express that? I happen to believe that AJC is the premier frontline global Jewish advocacy organization. I believe it, and we tried to display it over the last 4 days of this global forum. No, not all Jewish organizations are created alike, any more than all hospitals are alike or all universities are alike. If I tried to say to someone, it doesn't matter whether you go to Princeton or Podunk, because they're all committed to education, people would laugh at me. And if I said it doesn't matter whether you go to the Mayo Clinic or whether you go to the local medical center, people would laugh at me. And I'm saying the same thing. The stakes couldn't be higher for the Jewish people, for the American Jewish community, for the global Jewish community, for the state of Israel. They couldn't be higher. We have to make informed decisions about where we spend our time and invest our efforts. And I believe at this critical moment in time, and you've seen it in the last 4 days with our programming, with the level of our speakers, with the depth of our content, that AJC is here for the long haul. We have made a difference. We are making a difference. And with the help of the people on this Zoom session, we can continue to make a difference and ensure that those 11 4- and 5-year-old children at the Chabad school graduation ceremony have a bright and secure future.
Thank you, David, for that powerful message and for your inspiring words. I think you've made it quite clear to our audience what's at stake, both for the Jewish people and for the world, for that matter. If you'd like to join us in our efforts in AJC's work, please make a donation to support us by going to ajc.org/give and to get involved today. I want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning into this session and really throughout this incredible week and for helping us to reimagine what's possible. We really do hope your journey with AJC will continue. Following Global Forum, we will continue offering our Advocacy Anywhere programming, AJC's free webinars that enable you to learn, engage, and advocate from wherever you are. And you can stay up to date on that programming by visiting ajc.org/advocacyanywhere. And finally, don't forget to save the date for next year's Global Forum, as David mentioned, which will be in Washington, D.C., in person, May 22nd through 24th, and more information to come. Thank you.